All right, let's determine whether a statement is true. Given that a conditional, remember a conditional is if P then Q, and its conclusion, that's the Q part of that statement, are true, can you use deductive reasoning to determine whether the hypothesis is true? Hint, think about a completed truth table. So can we use deductive reasoning to determine whether the hypothesis is true? We might want to know what deductive reasoning is. So let's put that in that definition in your notes. Go ahead and pause if you need to. But deductive reasoning is a process of reasoning using given and previously known facts to reach a logical conclusion. Okay, so we had a truth table in our previous lesson, so I'm just going to recreate that. Here's our hypothesis, here's our conclusion, here is our conditional if P then Q. So let's just look at all the possibilities for how this could play out. We're going to recreate that table, and that's going to help us answer this question. Oops. All right, so yep, here we are just making a table. Okay, so if your hypothesis is true and your conclusion is true, then the conditional if P then Q is true. If your hypothesis is true, but your conclusion is false, then the conditional statement will be false. If your hypothesis is false, but your conclusion is true, your conditional statement will be true. If your hypothesis is false and your conclusion is false, then the conditional statement will be true. So remember, we said in our previous lesson that if your hypothesis is false, regardless of the conclusion, the conditional statement will be true. So we'll just keep that in mind, point it out when we notice it. So what they are saying is, given that a conditional and its conclusion are true. So for the conditional to be true, here's our conditional. We want that to be true. So where is our conditional true? I'm just going to look at this column right here. Here's where the conditional is true. It's actually true 3 times. Here, here, and here. So I'll just kind of, oops. I will just point to those. That's where your conditional is true. But it also says, and the conclusion is true. So we want the conclusion to also be true. So in these examples, where is your conclusion also true? So in this one, the conclusion is true, so we can consider this. That's where the conditional and the conclusion are true. Here, your conditional is true, and your conclusion is true, so we can consider this. Here we have a conditional is true, but the conclusion is false, so we are not going to consider that one. So the question we're being asked, and I know that I kind of scrolled down here, is can you use deductive reasoning? We're using reasoning given previously known facts to reach a logical conclusion, using given and previously known facts to reach a logical conclusion to determine whether the hypothesis is true. So for these 2 examples, do you notice how in this one, the hypothesis is true, but in this one, the hypothesis is false? Because we're getting 2 different truth statements there, you can't use deductive reasoning to tell if a hypothesis is true. If those both were true, if we had a true and a true, then we would be able to, because if your conditional is true and if your conditional is true and the conclusion is true, is the hypothesis always true? And we can see that right here it's not. So to answer the question, no. Exclamation point. You cannot determine whether the hypothesis is true with deductive reasoning.